Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we have with us John Asher, who is a global leader in growth strategy, and he's talking today to us about his new book he just released. So welcome to the program, John.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So give us a little background on yourself, and then what led you to write your book, Close Deals Faster?
Well, I've had three great careers. One was in the Navy. Another was starting and running an engineering company that I sold. And then I retired, and I failed retirement.
So you got bored.
So I started building a sales advisory services firm, and now over 20 years, our group has trained about 80,000 salespeople in 22 countries. And starting about 10 years ago, people would, of course, start saying, well, why don't you write a book about this? Mm-hmm. So it's really in response to everybody who keeps asking me, please write a book.
Yeah, and it's kind of like also it could, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a really popular way for people to acclimate a new prospect to your business is to say, hey, before we connect up, take a look at my book, read through it, and then that'll kind of bring you up to speed on some of our strategies. And then when you do meet with them, you end up not having to rehash some of the basic introductory things because they're up to speed on that.
No, you're exactly right. It's a great strategy, really.
I heard that on a podcast a few years back from Marcus Sheridan, the sales lion, and he called it assignment selling. And he discovered it when he was doing his work still at the pool and spa company he was with, and he would notice when he closed deals for a new pool or spa, it typically just astronomically was more so from people that he could tell that had gone to his website and viewed just dozens of articles. And the ones that wouldn't show up for an appointment or didn't buy, they viewed like one article or none. And so we started seeing that trend and then started then proactively saying, hey, before we send our team out to meet with you, make sure that you read these articles and this, video or whatnot. And it really seemed to help. So in that sales, that mindset, close deals faster, what are some of the tips that you are starting off with as far as, laying that good foundation so that people, and I know you don't mean close a deal and just get her done. You want to close it with, everyone feeling like they won. So what are some tips that way?
Yeah, exactly. You always want it to be a win-win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've essentially done is, after running a government contractor at the engineering firm, I really didn't know how to sell to commercial companies. So I personally started going to all of them to get myself up to speed. I went to, you name it, Dale Carnegie, Miller Hyman, Achieve Global, Wilson Learning, the Professional Selling Skills, the great Xerox sales training, complex sales from IBM. And so every time I would go, I would say, great stuff, but it can't be the whole answer. So after going to all 15, I said, okay, now let's see if we can boil this down, get rid of the overlap, and make something that's very simple to use and makes a lot of sense and is based on how our old brains, the buyer's old brains, make decisions. So that's essentially how I came up with the right architecture for salespeople.
That makes a whole lot of sense. I love when I hear that response, and you hear it very infrequently, which is I went to the greats, and I learned and I culled some of the top teachings, and then I kind of took the highlights from each one and kind of made them my own, and I polished this piece up, and I tweaked that piece, and I came up with this system that takes the best of all the systems, and here is my system called the whatever.
Exactly. So there's really no new ideas.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So where do you start if you're working with a new client on sales? Where do you start with them in respect to tweaking their systems?
Well, almost, if you look at the Harvard data, Harvard University analyzes the sales groups every year. There's about 25 million salespeople in the U.S. right now. And typically every year, it doesn't change much. The top 5 or 10% are elite. The rest are untrained and average. And because of that, the turnover rate for salespeople in the U.S. is 37% per year. So one of the things that we really have been doing for the last 3 or 4 years that really separates us is there has been an explosion of neuroscience studies really around the world. There's a worldwide forum of neuroscientists in 70 countries, all sharing their results of their studies and research, and they're really focused on human communications and decision-making. And most neuroscientists never heard of sales and marketing, but all of those old brain stimuli, all of those cognitive biases apply directly to sales and marketing.
Sure.
So that's one of the things that really separates us from the pack is we're really the only global sales training company that really focuses on those old brain stimuli and the cognitive biases.
Yeah, because that really makes so much sense when you think about what science and research has confirmed. Because I think that if you were to throw out some quotes or stats or things for the neuro side of things, someone could go, that sounds a little, frou-frou or hinky. But when it's backed up by research and, valid research and then field-tested research, it starts to come to life. Do you find that with some clients as well?
Exactly. And so, sales has always been thought of as an art. So we've learned from the masters, we've gotten feedback from our boss, we've done sales skill training, we've done trial and error, see what works for us. But now we know the science behind sales. We know why all these various techniques work. And in many cases, it totally upsets what we thought was the right thing to do. So that's the real interesting part to me.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I love seeing when these. I personally love reading the old Napoleon Hills and the old greats because, like you just said, not much is brand spanking new. It's just some new twists on things or some new approaches or technologies that get applied to it. But some of those old, the success principles, those are tried and true.
Absolutely right.
So what are people tending when they read your book? What are they tending to pull away from it and find that is new and able to be implemented?
Well, one is there's 6 closing principles, how to close a deal. And if you sum up 300 books on sales, almost every book on sales has closing as a skill. There's about 12 books that are just about closing. And so if you sum it all up, you can kind of boil it down to 6 closing principles. Behind each principle, there is neuroscience that shows you why it works. And behind each principle is the data from big sales institutes like Miller Hyman or Dale Carnegie that shows what happens if you don't use the principle correctly. So that's a real eye-opener for a lot of people. That there is 6 closing principles. You got to know them all. There's neuroscience behind each, and there's data behind each. Would you like to hear?
Some of these principles you're mentioning. I wonder if it translates into working with sales teams, and I'm confident that it does. But do you find that there's any disconnect where maybe a salesperson individually would feel like, well, of course I can do these things, but boy, how do I get everyone, those geese flying in the same direction and everyone on the same page? What do you find translates well for motivating teams?
Motivation is a very complex subject. There's really 3 aspects to it. One is internal. So for example, people who have are born with a high goal orientation or high intensity and drive will almost always do better in sales because they're driven to make quota. So part of motivation just comes from within. It's us. People who are much more laid back and don't really care whether they make more money or that sort of thing usually don't fit too well in sales. I'm sure you know. The second part of motivation is there's 2 parts of motivation that are external. One comes from within the company, and that is your sales manager a brilliant sales coach, or they totally ignore you, or are they a jerk? In other words, it's very tough to work for. Another example of that type of external motivation would be, does the company have the sales and marketing processes to support the salesperson? And then the third part of motivation comes from outside the company, external also. And that is, the price of oil drops by 2/3, and the buyers aren't buying anything for 6 months, that has a huge impact on salespeople's motivation. So there's 3 aspects to motivation, and the third part is out of our control, right? We can't help it if the bank suddenly pulls the funding or the price of oil drops by 2/3, which of course we know it did. So those external factors are really out of our control. The other external factors for a salesperson are within the company and the company's management team and that sort of thing. And there's the internal drive that the salesperson's got. So we have a sales manager who's got to manage all that motivation. It's a tough job.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So I know you believe in assessments and things like that, but what do you say to someone that says, I don't need an assessment. I'm just good at what I do, and I just naturally have those skills and abilities. But in reality, sometimes that assessment gives you that foundation to work with.
So if you really boil down what it takes to be successful in sales, you come up with 5 factors. First is product knowledge, and if you deal with a salesperson, it's pretty obvious after a few questions that they really don't know what they're talking about. Well, then they're out. So the great salespeople have brilliant product knowledge. And, in the last 15 years, since half the industries are going more and more technical, buyers, especially higher-level buyers, would much rather work with a subject matter expert with deep technical knowledge than with a salesperson with shallow technical knowledge who they know the buyer knows is really just trying to sell them something. So that's the first part, the first 5 of the 5 factors. Second is natural talent for sales based on assessments and personality. Third is selling skills, the subject of the book. Fourth is motivation that you asked about already. And the 5th is the sales and marketing processes to support the company. So when you look at those 5 factors and do a meta-analysis, and there's a big summary of all the studies from the large HR and sales institutes, aptitude or personality accounts for 50% of results. And the other 4 factors combined is the other 50%. So aptitude isn't everything, but it's fairly significant. It's fairly significant. It accounts for half the results. And to give you an idea, just a simple idea, the one we've used for many years is called the Advanced Personality Questionnaire. And when you take it, you will see how much from 0 to 100% compared to everybody else you have of 9 personality traits. And I'll give you a couple examples. First is intensity drive. And we've already talked, right? That's got to be high for a salesperson. Right? Second would be independence. And the best salespeople like to be independent. They like to be out of the office. They like to run their own show. Third would be need to analyze, and you actually want that low. You don't want salespeople all bogged down in analysis paralysis. Fourth would be need to serve other people, and you actually want that to be moderate. You want salespeople to have the natural inclination to build rapport with another person, but if they're really high in need to serve, they'll spend way too much time building rapport and never get down to sell.
Nothing gets done.
Exactly. The 5th factor is assertiveness, which you want it to be high. You want salespeople to have the natural gumption to ask for the order when it's the right time. 6 is recognition. And so most salespeople that are high, you want that to be high because you want salespeople who want to go to trade shows, want to go to networking events, want to make new friends, build new relationships. So that's just an example of 6 of the 9 personality traits, and it really isn't rocket science, as you can hear, right? It's kind of obvious where you want salespeople to be. Yeah.
Last question, and then we'll wrap up, but it just makes me think of this. I know I tend to lean this way too, and it may be a bad thing, but you hear about, closing techniques and scripts and processes and assessments and things like that. Where do you encourage a sales manager to say, okay, you got your top performers, and I know they're going to push up against you on this, but we don't want them to read a script word for word, but you don't want them going off on a tangent, because I feel like some salespeople would say, I've been doing great my whole career, I don't need to start off with small talk and move to finding where they want to be in their business and then finding where they currently are and closing the gap and all of that, when in reality, I just talk. I'm a human, I'm transparent, I'm authentic, and I develop some rapport, and I find out what they need, and I just show them exactly how we can help them, and if there's a fit, that's great. Where do you diffuse that? Because that could be too far on the other end where you're not getting into some of those great sales strategies.
So let's just take one example from these neuroscientists and all their research. There's two parts of the brain: the old brain, which comprises the lizard brain, the fight, flight, appease brain, that controls all our autonomic functions like breathing and heart rate. There's the emotional brain that's all about feelings, and there's the rational brain, which is all about facts, figures, complex thinking. And since they're both over 150 million years old, neuroscientists lump the emotional and lizard brain, or reptilian brain, and they call it the old brain. And they take the rational brain, the brain we're using right now, right, the facts, figures, complex thinking, as the new brain. And so we now know from many studies in mental hospitals where patients are analyzed that have lost their old brain, either through car accidents or tumor, injury, that sort of thing. Those people cannot make a decision. They can't decide whether to have a ham or a turkey sandwich for lunch. So we now know all decisions are made by the old brain. So here's a practical example. Your company and two other companies are vying for a large opportunity, and all three companies have good experience, great quality, great service, reasonable prices. So in the buyer's mind, all three companies are kind of tied for first. Well, which one does the buyer choose? Well, the buyer chooses the salesperson who he likes the best, the one that's built the best rapport, the one he has the best feeling about. So you've heard this term, I'm sure: we decide on emotion and justify with logic. Use that term or some variation of it. So here's where the justify with logic comes in. Your firm and two others are vying for another opportunity. Two firms, including yours, have great stuff, tied for first in the buyer's mind. The third company, really just an average company. So even though the buyer may have felt the best about the salesperson from the average company, built the best rapport, likes them the best, they're not going to choose that average company because they don't have the logic to justify the emotional decision. So that's the
I've heard that. I love exactly where you're going with that, and I want to interject in a question/point, which is I've heard that called heuristics, where at that point in time the prospect, they feel like, I want to make this decision in favor of this, but I can't justify it because I don't know enough, or I don't trust enough, and I don't know, like, and trust. But if they saw and fill in the blank with social proof, testimonials, reviews, as seen on their keynote speaker, they wrote a book, all these kind of trust triggers, that could help close that gap for them in their mind. Does that make sense?
Totally agree. And, a heuristic is really a brain process that allows us to make adequate decisions in a complex environment. And in almost every and it's important. A heuristic is important when the speed and efficiency of the decision is needed. The other side of heuristics is sometimes they can lead us down the wrong path, make a decision too quickly. And the book by Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, was really the first guy to really show us all of these heuristics. Now, they're sometimes called cognitive biases or shortcuts or rules of thumb. And right now, from this worldwide forum, there are 6 stimuli to wake up the buyer's old brain, and 50 of these heuristics or cognitive biases, all of which apply to sales and marketing. So it's an incredible amount that we've learned here in the last 3 to 5 years from this worldwide forum. So
I love where the direction is going, because people are finally, catching up to research, and science and data is catching up to some of the things that even some of the old greats knew. And frankly, sometimes salespeople don't even know why they're great. And then when someone analyzes them, they're like, well, you do this and you don't do that, and you develop this report and you have this, and they're like, oh, well, that's good to know. And so I think that's really neat that someone like yourself has studied these traits and can distill them down into some strategies so that people can, come along behind and learn. And it's kind of like, I'm sure I don't remember exactly who said this, but I know you know the quote, "Success leaves clues." Well, why not just look at the success of all these other greats and look at their clues? And if you can learn from a book like Close Deals Faster, then that's a wonderful opportunity. So what's the best way people can learn more about your book and pick up a copy for themselves?
Well, to see what the company's doing, you can go to www.asherstrategies.com. And if you want the book, of course, just go to Amazon. And it was published on 10/24, and it sold out in 15 minutes on Amazon. So that was great news. Now, it may have been they only had 3 in stock. But anyway, it's been doing extremely well.
No, I'm sure they had 3 million.
I don't think so. But anyway, you can just get it on Amazon.
Sure. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, John. It was wonderful getting to know you, and thank you for your work in the field.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed the interview.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.